I'm Noah, 38, and at my brother's wedding I watched my family laugh as someone shouted, "Still single, huh?" What they didn't know was that I had been living with my fiancé Jason for 3 years. The silver ring under my shirt felt heavier with every word. After a lifetime of pretending I brought him to this wedding. And this time I didn't walk in alone. I hadn't been back to Savannah in over 5 years. The Spanish moss still draped over the oaks like it remembered every whisper I had ever left behind. The air smelled of ocean salt and jasmine thick with memories I didn't ask for. As the cab turned down my mother's street, my hands clenched instinctively in my lap. The ring on my left finger pressed against the inside of my palm. I turned it absently. Mom's house stood proudly as ever, pristine white siding, navy shutters, perfectly aligned, American flag crisp on the porch. Her front yard was trimmed like a golf course. Margaret Blake didn't allow imperfection, not even in her grass. The front door opened before I even reached the porch. My mother stood there in beige slacks and a silk blouse, her hair pulled tight in a bun. Her arms weren't open. "You look older," she said. "So do you." I replied, brushing past her into the hallway that smelled like lemon cleaner and judgment. Daniel's wedding rehearsal dinner was at 6. I was told this the moment I put my suitcase down. No welcome back. No how have you been. Just logistics. She told me the dress code, the guest list, and where I'd be seated like I was a late addition to a seating chart rather than her firstborn. I nodded through it, feeling the walls tighten. Later that afternoon, I sat on the edge of the guest bed in the room that used to be mine. Everything had been changed, redecorated in neutral tones and cold furniture. It wasn't my room anymore. Probably hadn't been since I left. I pulled out my phone. One missed message from Jason. "Let me know how it goes. I love you." I typed back. "Still alive. You sure you're okay being in the same hotel?" His reply came fast. "I'm not hiding, Noah. I'll wait as long as you need." I looked at my reflection in the window, the early evening sun catching the gray creeping into my hair. 38. I wasn't ashamed of that number, but somehow it felt like a dartboard everyone else kept aiming at. At 6 sharp, I arrived at the rehearsal dinner held at the rooftop of the historic Davenport Hotel downtown. The view overlooked the river, lights twinkled, wine flowed, everyone was dressed like this was the real wedding. Daniel and Emily looked radiant. He hugged me hard when he saw me, called me big bro like we were still close. She gave me a warm, polished smile. I saw Mom working the room, wine glass in hand, whispering in the ears of aunts and uncles, likely updating them on my career or lack thereof, or maybe about my bachelor status. I could almost hear her. "He lives in Portland now, writes something. TV maybe. No mention of Jason, no mention of the real reason I never called." I took my seat at the far end of the table. The seat next to me was empty. Mom had insisted I not bring anyone, said the numbers were tight. I hadn't fought her on it. Dean Marshall, one of Daniel's college buddies, took the microphone halfway through the meal. He had the loose charm of someone who thought he was the funniest person in the room. He was halfway through a toast when he spotted me and grinned. "Well, look who decided to come home. Noah Blake, everybody. Still single at 38. Guess we can't all be lucky in love like Dan here." Laughter. A ripple through the crowd. I laughed too because it was easier, because I'd had years of practice. I looked down at my hands at the silver ring Jason gave me last winter. A promise made quietly in a snowy cabin outside Mount Hood. It shimmered under the tablecloth. I could feel Mom's eyes on me from the other end of the table. She didn't smile. She didn't laugh. She just sipped her wine like everything was going according to script. I excused myself early, saying something about jet lag. As I stepped outside into the night, I texted Jason. They laughed. He replied, but they didn't know. I stood for a long while on the sidewalk, the cool Georgia air curling around me. The river in the distance looked still, like it was holding its breath. So was I. The last time I stood still like that, watching something so calm while chaos brewed beneath the surface, I was 12. It was a Sunday morning. My father had taken me out early to the farmer's market before church, just the two of us. We walked through rows of peaches and honey jars while he told me stories about his time in college, how he met Mom, how life wasn't always about winning. He bought me a watercolor set from a local vendor without telling her. I still remember the way the light caught the gold foil wrapping. It felt like permission to breathe. When we got home, she was already in a mood. The eggs were too runny, the towels folded wrong. My father handed her flowers. She barely looked up. Then she saw the art set in my hand. Her lips tightened. Not that again. Richard Blake had always been the buffer. When Mom raged, he softened. When she criticized, he deflected. He made space where she made structure. I didn't realize until much later that his love was quiet because it had to be. He died on a Thursday. Massive stroke. I was 31, living in Portland, writing my first real screenplay. He had left me a voicemail 2 days before, said he was proud of me, said he had watched one of my short films online and didn't understand it, but liked how I told stories without shouting. I never called back. Mom called during a meeting. I left the building with the script pages still in my hand. My breath caught in my throat. When I landed in Savannah, the funeral had already been planned. The church booked the guest list, curated like one of her fundraisers. No space for grief, just performance. I stood in the back of the chapel while she eulogized him as a strong man, a provider, a symbol of integrity. She didn't mention how he used to hum old blues songs while cooking eggs for me, or how he once let me skip school to go see an art exhibit in Atlanta. After the burial, she handed me an envelope, a copy of his will. The estate was in her name, the house, the lake cabin, the investment accounts. I didn't expect anything. I hadn't lived there in years, but it wasn't the money that stung. It was the note that came with it, a typed paragraph from her, not from him. Your father respected your choices, I don't, but he wanted me to make sure you knew he loved you even if he didn't understand you. I read it 3 times, then folded it and placed it back in the envelope. That was the last time I saw her before this wedding. Growing up under Margaret Blake was like living in a constant audition. There was no space to just be. Every day was a rehearsal for the future she had scripted. My grades weren't achievements, they were expectations. A minus meant lazy, an A meant doing the bare minimum. College wasn't a discussion. She handed me the brochures for Columbia and Stanford the week I turned 16. When I brought home a drawing I did of a jazz quartet, she threw it in the trash before I could even hang it. What does this get you in the real world? Her idea of affection came in the form of management, schedules, etiquette lessons, church committees. She signed me up for a debate camp the same summer I wanted to take a photography class. When I said I didn't want to go, she canceled my allowance and said if I was going to act like a child, I could be treated like one. She didn't raise a son, she built a project. And when that project started to crack, when I came home from college after my second year and told her I wanted to switch majors from pre-law to creative writing, she went cold. Said I was wasting my potential, said I would regret it. That night, she called an old family friend who worked at a law firm and asked if they had internships. Without asking me, she introduced me to women at every church function, always with the same tone. This is Rachel. She just got into med school. This is Amanda. Her father owns a few dealerships. This is Chloe. She bakes. Isn't that charming? When I told her I wasn't interested, she tightened her smile. You're just picky. When I told her I wasn't dating women, she froze. For a full 10 seconds. Then she stood up and poured herself a glass of wine. Don't be ridiculous, Noah. I was 26 when I left, packed up my things while she was at a charity luncheon, wrote a note that said thank you for trying, drove west until the humidity faded and the silence in the car didn't feel like punishment. In Portland, I built something. Slowly, quietly, I got used to rain, to walking alone, to freedom that didn't feel like rebellion. I wrote waited tables, wrote more. I met people who didn't need me to be anything other than real. I found rooms that felt warm. I found Jason. He knew about my mother before he knew much else. I told him the second week we started talking. He just nodded and said he had one too. Not like yours maybe, but enough to understand. He never asked me to go back. Just made sure I knew I could if I ever wanted to or needed to. Now here I was back in a house that once held every version of me I hated, in a city that only remembered the mask, back in the room that wasn't mine anymore. I laid on the stiff guest bed staring at the ceiling. I could hear the faint echo of my mother's voice downstairs. Probably on the phone, probably talking about floral arrangements or seating charts or how I had embarrassed her by leaving early. I turned off the lamp. I wasn't tired, but I was empty. The first apartment I rented in Portland was a converted attic above a bakery in the Pearl District. The ceilings were slanted, the pipes groaned at night, and the windows let in too much cold air in the winter. But it was mine. No curated decor, no family portraits staring down from the mantel, no scent of lemon polish, just a mattress on the floor, a second-hand desk, and the first breath I'd taken in years that didn't feel like it came with conditions. I worked nights at a gastropub downtown, spent my mornings writing screenplays no one had asked for, dramas about fathers and sons, about people breaking from molds they never chose. None of it was brilliant, but it was honest. That felt like enough back then. I met Jason at a gallery opening in 2019. A friend from the restaurant dragged me there, promising free wine and moody lighting. I remember standing in front of a massive oil painting, something abstract and angry, when he stepped beside me. He had a quiet presence, tall with dark hair flecked in gray at the temples, like he had survived something. He didn't say anything for a while, just looked at the painting. Then he said he liked how the brushstrokes felt unresolved. Like the artist knew he wasn't done, but hung it anyway. We talked for almost an hour after that. He told me he taught at Pacific Northwest College of Art. I told him I waited tables and wrote stories nobody read. He smiled and said that sounded like freedom. At the end of the night, he handed me a card. No number, just his name and the department he worked in. I Googled him before I ever emailed. The first article that popped up was from a local paper 3 years old. A student had accused him of misconduct. Not harassment, not assault. The details were vague, but the language was sharp. Allegations of bias, of favoritism. The investigation cleared him, but the damage lingered. Students protested his lectures. Colleagues stopped inviting him to panels. His name became a quiet warning. I almost didn't reach out, but something about the way he looked at that painting stayed with me. The way he saw unfinished things and didn't flinch. We got coffee the following week, then dinner, then a walk through Washington Park where neither of us talked much but somehow said enough. He told me about the fallout, how it changed the way he moved through the world, how he had once believed that being careful was the same as being safe. Now he didn't believe in either. When I told him about my mother, about how silence had become survival, he didn't react with pity, just nodded like he'd already known. We took things slowly. At first, he didn't want to be seen with me around campus. I didn't push. I understood. We found corners of the city where we could exist without explanation. Early morning hikes, late-night diners, the back table at Powell's Books where no one looked twice. In the summer of 2020, right after lockdowns lifted, he moved into my place. I had upgraded to a one-bedroom near Laurelhurst Park. He brought his books, his art supplies, his half-broken coffee maker that somehow made the best espresso I'd ever tasted. It didn't feel like a milestone. It felt like a soft landing. We never posted photos, never held hands in public if we thought someone might recognize him. There were no dinners with colleagues, no introductions to old friends. But inside those walls we were real. We cooked together, argued about how much garlic was too much, watched documentaries and made fun of the voiceovers. On Sundays he painted in the sunroom while I wrote. I never asked what he was painting. He never asked what I was writing. It was enough that we were there. Sometimes I wondered if that made us cowards. If choosing peace over visibility was just another version of the closet. But Jason had already lost so much. I didn't want to add to that, and maybe deep down I wasn't ready either. When the invitation to Daniel's wedding came in the mail, Jason was the one who opened it. He read it, set it down, and said nothing. I waited 2 days before bringing it up. I don't want to go alone, I said. He looked up from his sketchpad. You don't have to. You know what I mean. He nodded. I do. I asked him if he was sure, if he could handle the looks, the whispers, the possibility of seeing my mother again. He didn't answer right away, just reached for my hand, ran his thumb across the ring he had given me last Christmas. Not a proposal, not officially, just a promise. If you're ready, then so am I. We booked the tickets that night, separate flights, different hotels, just in case. A contingency plan neither of us said out loud, but both of us felt. He would arrive 2 days after me, wait until the wedding day itself, stay in the background until I gave him the signal. No pressure, no expectations, just the truth, finally, fully. I stared at that ring now, the one pressed into the skin of my palm back in Savannah. The one no one had noticed, or if they had chose not to ask about. Jason was in town. Probably sitting in his hotel room reading, waiting. And me, I was back in the house. I ran from pretending to belong at a table that never made space for me, but not for much longer. Dinner was at 7, a formal affair at the Red Oak Terrace, one of the oldest private venues in Savannah. Margaret had made sure it felt like a wedding itself, with string lights woven through white columns, gold-rimmed china, and a 4-course menu printed in cursive on ivory cardstock. I arrived early, jacket, pressed shoes, polished tie, knotted so tight it felt like a leash. As I stepped inside, my mother was already directing staff, repositioning place cards, adjusting candles that didn't need adjusting. She spotted me and smiled the way she smiled at bank managers and mayors. I braced myself. Noah, you remember Chloe, don't you? I turned. Chloe Sanders, blonde, manicured, radiant in a pale blue dress that probably cost more than my flight. She had been around when we were teenagers. Her father was on the board of the hospital. Back then she had braces and a high ponytail. Now she looked like a Southern Living cover girl. Chloe smiled and leaned in for a hug. Noah, it's been ages. You haven't changed a bit. Neither have you, I said, though we both knew it wasn't true. Margaret beamed. Chloe just moved back from Atlanta. She's consulting now. Lives right near Forsyth Park. Isn't that wonderful? I nodded, already sensing where this was going. Chloe pulled out the chair beside mine. Of course she was seated next to me. I glanced at the name cards, subtle as a train horn. We sat. The first course was served, white wine poured. I made polite conversation with Chloe, who told me about her latest client, a luxury skincare brand expanding in the Southeast. She asked if I still lived in California. Oregon, I corrected. Portland. She smiled and said she'd never been, but heard it was very green. The conversation turned to Daniel, to the ceremony planned for the next day, to Emily's dress, which was apparently custom-made in Charleston. I half-listened, eyes flicking toward the door every few minutes. Jason was supposed to check into the hotel by now. Chloe touched my arm lightly when she laughed. Margaret noticed and looked pleased. I wondered if she had orchestrated the seating chart herself or had simply given a list of names and unspoken expectations. Dean Marshall, Daniel's best friend, stood and tapped a fork against his glass. He was 3 drinks in and glowing with self-importance. "All right, folks, since no one's brave enough to give a toast, I'll get us started." He cleared his throat dramatically, gave some speech about friendship and brotherhood, quoted a football coach, and then turned to me with a grin. "And let's not forget our favorite mystery man, Noah Blake. Still single at 38, folks. Somebody tell me what's going on there." The laughter was instant, loud, performative. Even Chloe giggled behind her hand. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was safer. Safer than silence, safer than what I wanted to say. Dean raised his glass. "Here's to finding the one before we hit 40, buddy." I clinked his glass. My teeth hurt from smiling. After the toast, dessert came. Chloe leaned in again, her voice soft. "I hope that wasn't too much. Dean always pushes boundaries." "I'm used to it," I said, "but thank you." Her eyes lingered on mine. There was a question there unspoken. I didn't answer it. Across the room, Margaret watched us like a director waiting for the scene to hit its cue. When Chloe touched my arm again, my mother nodded, barely perceptible. I excused myself before coffee was served. Outside, I took a breath. The sky was deep navy, the air thick with humidity. I stepped away from the front entrance, pulled out my phone and checked for messages. One text from Jason. "Settled in. Room's fine. Want me to come by?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. "Not tonight. They brought out the full Southern hospitality." He responded with a single line. "Remember why we're here." I slid the phone back in my pocket and leaned against a column. Inside, the laughter continued. I could hear Dean's voice above the others, telling some story that probably didn't belong to him. Chloe's laugh followed, a bright sound dulled only by the ache building behind my ribs. I had let them cast me before, let them decide what fit, what looked good on paper, what made sense. Tonight had been no different, but that was going to change. Soon. The next morning, I walked to a cafe near Pulaski Square, away from the wedding buzz and expectations. The trees offered just enough shade, the espresso was passable, and no one there looked like they knew my mother. I sat by the window staring at the foam patterns in my coffee when I saw her walk in. Susan Park had the same steady presence she'd had since I was a teenager, hair shorter now, silver at the edges. Her suit was tailored, her eyes sharper than I remembered. She spotted me, gave a small wave, and joined me at the table without small talk. "I wasn't sure you'd show," she said. "I wasn't either." She pulled out a slim manila folder and placed it between us. For a second, I didn't move. "Your father trusted you, Noah, more than you think." I glanced around the cafe. No one was paying attention. I opened the folder. Inside was a printed letter. On top, my father's name. Date March 3rd, 2018. Just weeks before the stroke. Susan watched me carefully as I read. It wasn't a legal document in the traditional sense, more like a personal addendum, a signed and notarized statement. It was clear, direct, and in his voice. "I support Noah's right to live truthfully and without shame. I respect his choices and wish for Margaret and Daniel to offer the same. Should I pass, I want this letter to be made available to him and to the family as part of my final wishes." I blinked twice before finishing. It felt like hearing his voice in a room I thought had gone silent forever. "You've had this since he passed," Susan nodded. "I sent it to your mother a week after the funeral. Certified mail. I never heard back." "Of course you didn't." She hesitated, then leaned in. "I kept a copy. I knew she might choose not to share it. Why now? Because you called. Because you're back. And because I think he'd want you to know." I closed the folder, slid it back toward her, then stopped. I looked up. "Can I keep it?" She smiled just faintly. "I made it for you." We sat in silence for a while. The city moved around us unbothered. A jogger passed the window, a couple laughed over iced coffee. But in my chest, everything shifted. "Do you think he was scared?" I asked. "Of you, of losing control, of disappointing her?" Susan folded her hands. "I think your father spent his life choosing quiet over conflict. But you were always louder than he could be. That's not a fault, Noah. That's survival." I thanked her, paid for her coffee, and walked out into the light. The folder tucked under my arm felt heavier than it should have. I didn't go back to the house right away. I wandered the historic district past homes with wraparound porches and window boxes spilling over. I thought about how many conversations had happened behind those doors, how many truths got swallowed. At the hotel later, Jason was waiting in the lobby. He stood as soon as he saw me, eyes scanning my face. "You okay?" I handed him the folder. He opened it slowly, read, then looked up. "He really wrote this?" "Yes." "And your mom never told you?" I nodded. He exhaled long and low, then hugged me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't public. Just grounding. That night I couldn't sleep. I laid on the guest bed, lights off, the document on the nightstand beside me. Every word ran on a loop. He knew. He believed me. He wanted better for me. And my mother buried it. I remembered how she had spoken at the funeral, how she had talked about legacy, discipline, strength, how she never once mentioned love. In that moment, it all clicked. The dinners with Chloe, the cold silence every time I brought up Portland, her refusal to let me bring a +1. It wasn't about etiquette. It was about control. I got out of bed, grabbed the letter, and reread it under the dim light. His handwriting in the margin, his name in ink. His voice finally loud enough to hold on to. Tomorrow was the wedding, and I wasn't going alone. The next morning I asked Margaret if we could speak privately. She hesitated, as if I had asked to borrow her pearls, then led me into the sunroom off the back porch. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and the ghost of old tobacco. She closed the glass door behind us with a deliberate click. "What is it, Noah?" I stood near the window, sunlight cutting across the floor in clean stripes. "I wanted to talk to you about tomorrow, about who I'm bringing." She didn't blink, didn't sit. "You're bringing someone?" "Yes, his name is Jason. He's my partner." She didn't flinch, but her hand tightened slightly on the back of a chair. "I see." I waited. The silence stretched long. Finally, she spoke. "This is Daniel's day. It's not about you. It's not about making it about me. It's about not hiding anymore." She turned toward the window, her voice flat. "You've made your choices. That's your business. But this is a family event, a traditional ceremony. There will be relatives, business partners, people who don't need to be confused. Confused. You know what I mean. No, I don't. Clarify it for me." Her mouth tensed. "I'm saying you can live however you want in Portland, but don't bring it here. Not to this." "He's not a scandal," I said. "He's not a weapon. He's a person, and he's with me." Her arms crossed tightly. "Why now?" "Why at this wedding?" "Because I'm tired," I said. "Tired of pretending, tired of smiling through jokes, tired of feeling like I have to apologize for who I love." She exhaled sharply through her nose. You're making this harder than it has to be. I'm not the one who hid a letter from Dad. I'm not the one who erased his voice because it didn't fit your image." Her face flickered just for a second, but then the cold returned. "Don't bring him. You'll make people uncomfortable. Uncomfortable isn't fatal, Mom." She stepped forward, lowering her voice like she was afraid someone might hear. "I don't care what you do in your own life, but don't embarrass me. Don't ruin this wedding. Don't take the spotlight off your brother because you want to make a statement." I stared at her, the woman who had choreographed every piece of this family for as long as I could remember, who painted over grief, edited out dissent, trimmed every truth that didn't match the wallpaper. "This isn't a statement. This is my life." Her eyes didn't soften. If anything, they grew harder. "Then keep it to yourself, just for one day." I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time I didn't see someone powerful. I saw someone terrified of losing control, of letting in a reality she didn't curate. "I won't lie for you anymore." She opened the door, a signal that the conversation was over. "Then don't expect me to protect you from what comes next." I stepped past her into the hallway, my hands shaking, but my spine straight. Daniel was coming down the stairs, adjusting his cufflinks. He paused when he saw my face. "Everything okay?" I smiled tight. "Peachy." I walked past him through the front door into the light. Jason was waiting. He was leaning against the rental car outside the house, arms crossed, sunglasses on, like he had just stepped out of a noir film. But when he saw my face, the pose dropped. He opened the passenger door without saying a word, and I climbed in. We drove in silence for a few minutes, heading toward the park near the river. I watched the trees blur past the window, my pulse still high from the conversation with my mother. When Jason finally spoke, his voice was low. "You talked to her?" "Yeah. How'd it go, like trying to teach a stone to swim?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We pulled into the small lot by the bluff where the view of the Savannah River was wide and quiet. He killed the engine and turned to me. "You sure about this?" I nodded. I'm tired of folding myself into her version of acceptable. "You don't have to come tomorrow if you're not ready, but I am." Jason looked out at the water. His fingers tapped lightly on the steering wheel. "I've been here before, Noah. Not this city, not this family." But the moment, the look, the fallout. He hesitated. "I don't want to be the reason they punish you." "They already do," I said, "with or without you. At least this way it's honest." He exhaled, slow and heavy. His voice was quieter when he spoke again. "You know I had tenure before everything fell apart. A department head, grants, respect, and none of it stopped them." He nodded. "You think if we do this it'll be worth it?" I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the folded letter from my father. Handed it to him. He read it slowly, his hands steady, his eyes scanning every line. When he finished, he held it like it might disappear. He knew. "Yeah," and she buried it. Jason leaned back in his seat, his thumb tracing the edge of the paper. Then his eyes met mine. "You're really going to stand in front of them tomorrow? Say it with your chest." I smiled, and my tie straight. He laughed, but it was soft, a little sad. "You're braver than I am." "That's not true," I said. "You stood by me when no one else did. You protected me for 3 years. Kept me safe even when it cost you. Now it's my turn. I get to walk into that room and say, this is the man I love. This is who I choose." He looked down at the letter again, then folded it neatly and gave it back. Okay. Let's do it." We sat there for a moment longer. The sun dipped lower, the sky streaked in amber. I reached over and took his hand. His fingers curled around mine. "So what do we wear?" he asked. I raised an eyebrow. Well, if we're making an entrance, he grinned. I was thinking dark navy, clean lines, minimalist, something that says I'm not here to fight, but I won't flinch either. Perfect. He nodded, then glanced at me. You ready to tell your brother? I sighed. That's next on the list. Think he'll take it better? Honestly, no idea. We stayed in the car until the light faded, then drove back to the hotel, quiet but steady. The kind of quiet that didn't feel like hiding anymore. The ceremony was set for noon at the Astoria Grand, one of the most ornate hotels in downtown Charleston. Crystal chandeliers, gold accents, floral arches that looked like they belonged in a movie set. Everything about it screamed spectacle, Margaret's taste, obviously. I arrived just before the string quartet started, alone. No one looked twice. I blended in easily with the sea of suits and cocktail dresses. The ushers handed out programs all embossed and tied with satin ribbon. I found my seat toward the front third row right side. Close enough to be seen, not close enough to be included. The room was filling quickly. Laughter floated around me, warm and easy. I scanned the space. Daniel stood near the altar, fixing his boutonniere, looking every bit the part of the groom. Emily, radiant in white, waited in a side room. Their happiness wasn't the problem. It never was. My eyes landed on Margaret, standing near the far corner, speaking softly with Chloe. Margaret's hand rested lightly on Chloe's shoulder. Her posture controlled, pleasant. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I knew that face. The smile that looked like warmth but felt like a threat. Then came the shift. A small commotion at the entrance. Nothing big, just enough heads turning to alert me. I stood and moved toward the back of the room, my heart rising before I even saw him. Jason was at the front desk just outside the ballroom, stopped by a security guard in a dark blazer. His brow was furrowed, calm but tense. Sir, I'm going to need to confirm your name again. You're not listed on the guest list. Noah Blake, Jason said, gesturing toward the closed ballroom doors. I'm with him. I'm his guest. I stepped up firm. He's with me. The guard turned to me, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. I'm sorry, sir. We were instructed to follow the list exactly. Then your list is incomplete. He's my partner and he's attending the ceremony. Jason stayed still, composed, though I could see the restraint in his jaw. The guard looked uncertain, then finally nodded. Understood, Mr. Blake. Go ahead. We walked in together. A few heads turned. Not many, but enough. Jason leaned toward me as we took our seats. Did she plan that if she didn't, she won't mind the result? He cracked the smallest smile. We sat quietly as the ceremony began. The officiant welcomed everyone. The music shifted. Emily walked in, veil, floating her father at her side. Everyone stood, but I didn't watch the aisle. I watched Margaret. Her smile never faltered, her hands clasped neatly. But her eyes flicked once toward us, then back to the front. A single beat of stillness. The vows started. I listened, but my mind wandered. Not because I didn't care, but because my body was coiled too tightly, like every muscle expected something to snap. When Daniel said I do, the crowd applauded softly. Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Chloe clapped a little too brightly. Jason slipped his hand onto my knee under the table. A quiet anchor. I exhaled. For now the room was still. The performance complete, but the reception was coming. And with it, the spotlight. The ballroom had been transformed during the cocktail hour. String lights wrapped the pillars, candles flickered across long banquet tables, and a jazz trio played near the bar. Laughter hummed through the room, the kind that signaled champagne and celebration had started doing their job. I stood near the edge of the dance floor, a flute of sparkling cider in hand. scanning the room. Jason was by the dessert table speaking quietly with one of Emily's cousins about abstract expressionism and the politics of museum funding. Classic Jason, always disarming people with knowledge instead of force. Dean clinked a spoon against his glass, the universal signal. The room quieted, lights dimmed slightly, and he stepped up to the small platform stage at the front of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll keep this short because I know no one came here to hear me speak. But as Daniel's oldest friend and the guy who survived bunking with him during freshman year, it's my duty and honor to offer a few words. He launched into a funny if slightly too long story about Daniel's high school crushes and one disastrous double date. The room laughed in all the right places. Dean had always known how to work a crowd. And then just as he wrapped up and people began lifting their glasses, Jason stood. He didn't ask me. He didn't warn me. He just walked up the few steps to the stage. Dean blinked, stepped aside instinctively. Jason turned to the crowd, microphone in hand, eyes calm. Good evening. I know most of you don't know me, so allow me to introduce myself. I'm Jason Rivera. He paused. And I'm Noah's partner. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was absolute. You could hear someone put down a fork on porcelain 3 tables away. Jason didn't fill the silence. He didn't explain, didn't joke, didn't soften the words. He simply turned, found me in the crowd, and extended his hand. I walked forward, slowly, aware of every stare, every breath held. When I reached him, I took his hand. Warm, steady. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Beside us, someone gasped. A subtle clink echoed from the left side of the ballroom. I glanced over. Margaret stood, her wine glass shattered at her feet, the stem still in her hand. Her face pale, her jaw locked. Chloe looked from me to her frozen mid-bite. Daniel sat stone-faced, Emily gripping his hand tightly under the table. I heard nothing. I felt Jason's thumb brush the back of my hand. We stood there side by side, 2 men in suits, no apologies in our posture. A slow murmur spread through the crowd. Some guests leaned in to whisper, others stared openly, a few looked away. I could see my aunt shaking her head. One of my cousins had her phone in her lap, likely texting someone under the table, and yet we didn't move. Eventually, the officiant from earlier cleared his throat and gently took the microphone back. Let's continue to celebrate the love that brought us here today. Applause followed, hesitant at first, then polite, then louder, like people convincing themselves they were comfortable again. We stepped down from the platform. Jason didn't let go of my hand. Margaret didn't move. Not yet. We passed her table without looking directly at her. Let them react. Let them whisper. Let the glass lie broken on the floor. We had said everything we needed to say, without saying much at all. The band was setting up for the first dance, tuning their instruments as waiters cleared half-empty champagne flutes from the head table. Jason and I sat off to the side near a tall window, our hands still linked under the table. But my mind was elsewhere, fixed on the envelope resting in my jacket pocket. I stood. Jason looked up, questioning. I need to do this now. He nodded once. I crossed the ballroom toward the stage. Susan was already near the edge of the room, sipping mineral water. She looked up as I approached, and her brows lifted slightly when she saw my expression. Is it time? It's time. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder, cream-colored, thick, embossed with the seal of the Blake & Park law offices. Her voice was quiet, measured, but her eyes burned sharp. Do you want me to read it? Please. Susan stepped onto the stage as the MC was announcing the next toast. She waited, hands folded, and when the MC paused, she raised her voice. Excuse me, I have something important to share. The mic passed to her. The crowd shifted. Heads turned. Daniel's smile faltered. Margaret froze mid-conversation with a guest. Chloe blinked rapidly. My name is Susan Park. I was Richard Blake's legal counsel for over 15 years. Before he passed in 2018, he wrote a personal addendum to his will, one he asked me to deliver if certain things ever came into question. I saw Margaret's fingers curl around her wine glass. Her shoulders squared. This letter was notarized, legally binding, and witnessed in accordance with South Carolina law. It was addressed directly to his son. Susan paused and unfolded the document. To my son Noah, there was no sound. I may not have always shown you the love you deserved. I was raised to believe silence was strength. But watching you grow taught me the opposite. Susan's voice held steady. Whether you live by your own rules or walk a path others don't understand, you are not a disappointment. You are my son, and I am proud of you. A gasp broke from somewhere near the dessert table. If anyone in this family dares to shame you for living honestly, know this. They are the ones I am ashamed of, not you. Jason's hand tightened around mine. Margaret was still seated, her expression blank, but her jaw twitched once. Then again, then her hand slipped and her wine glass tipped from her fingers. It shattered on the tile. Red wine bled across the floor like something wounded. Susan folded the letter and stepped back. I turned to look at my mother. She didn't meet my gaze. Chloe's mouth was slightly open, her fork frozen midair. Daniel stood up slowly. Emily's eyes were wide, glossy. No one spoke. I walked to the front of the room. I didn't need a microphone. That's who my father was, and that's what he left for me. Someone clapped, just once, then again, and again. The sound spread, hesitant, then stronger, until it filled the room like a tide coming in. Margaret didn't move, but I didn't need her to, because I had everything I needed, and I didn't get it from her. The video started circulating on Monday. Someone had captured the entire moment Jason introduced himself, the silence that followed, and the reading of the letter. By Wednesday, it was on a popular LGBTQ+ blog. By Friday, it had made its way to a national advocacy page, and the comments were pouring in. Some praised the courage, others debated whether weddings were the right place for personal stands. But the most repeated line, the one that stuck in every post, was my father's. You are not a disappointment. By Sunday, Margaret Blake was quietly removed from her chair position at the Charleston Heritage Foundation. A statement cited, a reevaluation of values and leadership direction. She didn't speak to the press. She didn't speak to me either. Chloe texted me on Tuesday, just one sentence. I'm sorry for not standing up sooner. Then another followed. She pressured me too for years. I was scared of her. I stared at my phone for a long time. I didn't reply. But I didn't block her either. Daniel called the next night. He said he and Emily were extending their honeymoon road trip and wanted to make sure I stayed in the house while they were away, said the place felt better with people in it. I didn't argue. Jason unpacked his overnight bag in the guest room but ended up falling asleep beside me on the couch during a documentary. Our legs tangled, blankets slipping off the side. For the first time in years, there was no tension in the air. No fear of someone walking in. No pretending. Margaret hadn't returned any of the spare keys, but I changed the locks anyway. We cooked meals, simple ones. Pasta with too much garlic eggs over sourdough toast. A tray of brownies that burned at the edges. Jason laughed more than I'd heard in months. I took photos. He let me post them. At the farmer's market that Saturday, a woman in her 60s came up to us. She introduced herself as Marion. She said she saw the video. She said her son came out to her 10 years ago, and she hadn't spoken to him since. Until she watched that clip. She called him after. She hugged me. I didn't know what to say. I just hugged her back. Back at the house, we sat on the back porch. The wind shifted through the oaks. Jason was sketching a new series, something abstract with bursts of crimson and blue. I was reading, but mostly watching him. I never thought Charleston would feel like a place I could exhale again. But it did. Slowly. In increments. In coffee cups left in the sink. In socks folded beside the bed. In Jason's voice humming a tune I didn't recognize while he cooked. This house was still haunted, but now it held new ghosts, better ones. At night I lay in my old room, now repainted and refloored. I stared at the ceiling fan still squeaking on the third rotation. I remembered my dad fixing it with duct tape and determination. He was never good at home repairs, but he tried. You are my son, and I am proud of you. I didn't know who forwarded the letter to the media. Maybe Susan, maybe someone else. It didn't matter. What mattered was that his voice, one I hadn't heard in years, had found its way back to me. Jason touched my wrist gently. You okay? I nodded. Yeah, I really think I am. The house was quiet again. Morning light filtered through the curtains in long golden lines, warming the hardwood floor and touching the edge of the coffee table where the wedding album sat. Jason had stepped out for a gallery meeting, but before he left, he kissed my forehead and said, "Take your time with it." I opened the album slowly. The cover was soft leather ivory with silver embossing, Emily's touch, no doubt. The first page held a wide shot of the venue tables blooming with white peonies, strings of lights caught mid-glow. Then Daniel and Emily, both radiant. Then came the family portraits. And finally, there it was, the photo. Jason and me standing side by side, hands joined naturally. He was in a navy suit, one I helped pick out. I wore a dark gray one with a tie that matched his eyes. We weren't smiling at the camera. We were smiling at each other. There was no hesitation in that image. No performance. Just us. I remembered the way his thumb traced over my knuckles right before the photographer clicked, the way the air in the room shifted after Susan read the letter, how the applause started slow, then built like a wave, like people didn't know how to react until they saw someone else brave enough to start. I ran a hand over the image, then leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling where that same fan kept squeaking every third turn. This is where the story ends for now, not with a perfect reunion or a neatly tied bow, but with truth. 38 years old, and no, I wasn't alone because no one wanted me. I was waiting for the one who saw all of me, and stayed. I came back to Charleston thinking I'd be an outsider again, a shadow in someone else's celebration. Instead, I found a mirror, and in it I saw who I really was, who I had always been underneath the weight of what everyone else wanted me to be. I didn't come alone. I brought love. I brought truth. I brought every scar and every step that got me here. And I'm not hiding anymore. If you've ever felt like you were living a life that wasn't yours, trying to meet expectations that crushed your spirit, let this be your reminder. You can always find your way back to yourself. And when you do, you might just find that someone was walking toward you the whole time, waiting for you to stop running. If this story spoke to you or reminded you of your own, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your voice matters, your truth matters, and someone out there is waiting to hear it.